Welcome back. For some time, I sympathized with Bernie Sanders. What attracted me to him was his honesty, if not always his ideas on policy. Although I found his opposition to the S 1033, the Kennedy McCain immigration bill, poorly thought. In other issues, he made a difference when compared to a Democratic Party specialized in giving florid speeches but caving gracefully and making little or no progress in policy. That's why it was definitely especially disappointing when the squad born in 2018 took the lead of Bernie's movement, and Bernie became a footnote in his own movement, and even more when he wouldn't dare to oppose Biden, even though Biden had stopped pretending to be the FDR he said he wanted to emulate at the beginning of his administration. But as catastrophic as Biden and then Harris's defeat was, that defeat gave us at least one thing. Bernie is trying to be the Bernie from the past, criticizing openly the Democrats' weaknesses and connecting again with voters, while Democrats have opted for playing dead. And though I would have preferred something more like reconnecting with the working class, I believe his fighting oligarchy tour is much better than playing dead, which is the Democrats' incredibly responsible strategy to counter what during the campaign they labeled as the worst threat to our democracy, by which they meant Trump. So let me bring you a few considerations about Bernie and the left. Number one, it's okay to highlight the damage Trump is hurting, a negative message, but it means very little if it doesn't come, if it's not a prelude of a positive message. It's not so. What is your alternative? It's not enough to say that Trump is not cool, especially when Democrats specialized for so long on making excuses when they were in power, which in the case of the left on the center left reached delirious levels when Democrats imposed on themselves pay as you go rules, while Democrats gave up revenue liberally in irresponsible tax cuts or spent without remorse. And this starting with Reagan, Bush first and then Bush the second, is not something new among Republicans. This not to mention the ill-conceived Iraq War. Yet the positioning of this attitude of these different standards, the rationalization of these two different standards has stayed as a brand, and therefore voters expect that Democrats must say how they are going to pay for their policies, while Republicans are always giving a pass. And why is that? Because Democrats have not done anything to correct that misconception that has taken root in the public's perceptions. So we need some definition on policy, but policy is not a wish list, and right now we don't find even that. I mean, in Bernie's movement. His 2016 message incarnated better the economic populism he's proclaiming right now. It was more in line with what FDR would have proclaimed himself, yet some things were notably absent. Medicare for All was a good way of rebranding single payer, yet it was not so good enough. You may say that there were many different angles that could have been used to sell Medicare for All, and they should have all started with narratives, with the concrete cases in which the current system excludes the people who are supposedly covered and with health insurance, and how these people could have been covered in other countries like Canada or England. And there are plenty of cases of these screw ups, which the Democratic Party didn't use them. So you see the negative message. These people are being cheated by these insurance companies. Your positive message, this is the way they should have been treated as as people are treated in the case of Canada or England, which are countries that are even the same Anglo-Saxon tradition. Then, though nobody wants to talk about the unpopular stuff, the taxes needed to pay for an agenda like Bernie's is an unavoidable step. Remember, but even then, that's not a major obstacle. Remember how Elizabeth Warren in 2020, far from thinking, she surged when she came up with her wealth tax because that made her program more credible, not like the adorable poem of a teenager, but that something that you believe could happen. So if you are a voter, so you can avoid the issue. Uh, Voters are not stupid, so you better uh, frame in frame it in terms that will make your program more credible instead of a liability you are desperately trying to hide when they answer give answers that is idiotic. This, why don't you asking me how I'm going to pay for my policies? Yeah, you don't ask Republicans how they are going to pay for the tax cuts. No, they should ask media should ask Republicans how Republicans are going to pay for their tax cuts, but they also should ask you how you are going to pay for your policies. So if you give idiotic answers, you destroy your own credibility. If you answer like Elizabeth Warren in 2020, on the contrary, you gain credibility. Then there is another fundamental issue. The working class needs better mechanism to earn a fair pay more than they need fiscal programs to compensate for the failures of the market. For instance, one of the favorite boogeymen of the left has been NAFTA because free trade was never solved correctly. NAFTA increased the purchasing power of many people, yet that improvement was absorbed by increases in prices in competitive sectors like education, housing, and especially healthcare. And this is important because as far back as in history as the 1930s, FDR understood that workers have pride and prefer to earn their own money more than they need what in his times was known as the dole. When we talk about making markets more competitive, the work of Thurman Arnold leading the Justice Department Antitrust Division in 1938 and FDR support for unionization are even more important reference than the child tax credit or the earned income credit as good as they may be in a transition to a more competitive system, not to mention a decent minimum wage adjustable to inflation that is important in a transition, but there are crutches you want to rid of one day because you don't need them. That may be why people didn't took this may be the reason why people didn't took to the streets to protest Republicans when they denied the vote to prevent the expiration of the expansion of the child tax credit created in 2017, only 1 year after its creation. So after 1 year, after just 1 year, this tax benefit expired without major protests among the working class. Though the Bernie of 2016 was more understanding with social issues like immigration, adopting the level of immigration policy instead of the opposition to the Kennedy-McCain bill I mentioned before. Identity politics had not by then inflicted yet to the left the damage it inflicted a few years later. So nobody in the working class whose cultural values are often more conservative felt upset by something like what would come later to be known as wokeism. 2020 was different though. With the surge of the squad in 2018, identity politics took the forefront, and it was not just the way it was conceived years before. Because before, when people spoke about identity politics, they spoke about using messages appealing to the needs of a specific constituencies, like, for instance, the need to refund the Voting Rights Act after it was defunct by the Supreme Court decision of 2013, or the need to reform the criminal justice system, or when it was believed that, or it was an important issue, immigration in the case of Hispanics. Yet, by 2020, infected by what the fourth wave of feminism calls intersectionalism, wokeism redefined, not supported, but redefined those issues. So regardless of what Pew Research polls showed about Black and Latino priorities, these priorities were changed to Blackface and Latinx. Regardless of transsexual people's real needs, they were replaced by the asking of their pronouns and or letting trans women, be it women in biological women in sports, and in the case of immigration justice was replaced by abolish ICE and the great prank at the border. Probably the two issues that showed the change the most were economic justice, which was replaced by an attempt to say why socialism was good, why it was cool, and immigration justice, which was replaced by abolish ICE, which pretty much was open borders, which it was very much unacceptable and going to an extreme no immigrants demanded. Perhaps it's very telling how in 2020, with more name recognition, Bernie Sanders did worse before Biden than he did before Clinton in 2016, when his message was economic justice and not that socialism was cool. Number two, it's also very telling the attitude of the young vote, which Bernie captivated in 2016. When his supporters claimed that Bernie represented the future that the calcified Hillary from the establishment couldn't understand. That was definitely an asset. Yet the young turnout for Bernie in 2020 was lower than in 2016 and weighed heavily in his defeat. Perhaps it's very telling how Kamala Harris lost that young vote to Trump in 2024 in even more significant numbers. So if you use that as an indicator, you would have to agree that the we need more the Bernie of 2016 and that the Bernie of 2016 was not the Bernie of 2020 and that the Bernie of 2020 being closer to Kamala Harris of 2024 is a recipe for disaster. I'm at the left, I mean. Number three, when it comes to minorities, their priorities were redefined by cool activists in the identity left, whose message was now preached by the squad. This was clear in the case of Black and Latino voters, as mentioned before, even though we know their priorities from Pew Research polls. These were redefined in ridiculous terms that alienated those minorities who are overrepresented in the working class, which Kamala lost. The same as in the case of immigration, to the point that it turned into the negative pro-immigrant trend that had kept growing for 2.5 decades before Biden came to power. And from there, it got to worse, like their bizarre case for allowing trans women in biological women's sports instead of tackling the urgent needs of the transsexual community. I have talked about that, how vulnerable this community is in another video, and how the real needs have been ignored and replaced by ridiculous and whimsy demands. And probably the worst is that the new identity politics elite cancel any voice who could oppose them, and redefine those needs, the needs of the working class, in terms that alienated that working class. And we can see that in clamorous terms in the 2024 demographics. This brings us to two supporting groups that have emerged in the last weeks. The message of leaders we deserve, a group created by David Koch, is vote for us because we are young. In itself a form of and is in itself a form of the same identity politics that has hurt the Democratic Party so much. If you go to the web page, you cannot see what they stand for, and hopefully the next week will mark an evolution in their platform. But so far, their message is that you have to vote for them for just because they are young. And that's a recipe to alienate, to destroy the credibility of the probably the only group that in the past has been successful to attract young voters. That would be a terrible responsibility and wasteful of credibility when credibility is needed the most. The other one is Rebellion Pack, and though it's still too green, shows more promise. And I'm going to make a video about them next week. But for now, I will say that you can run on issues just because they poll well. Those issues, they at least have a platform, but the platform is not based on whether those issues are salient, or other political marketing concepts that are relevant, but on the fact that they poll well. That's not enough. These issues must be salient and determinants of the vote, and here Rebellion Pact is found wanting. They promise more benefits instead of action to counter the imperfections of the market and forget the lesson Elizabeth Warren's run should have taught us in 2020. If you are from the left saying how you will pay for your agenda, we give your agenda credibility. Number 5, as mentioned in another video, the center left can offer two competing narratives. FDR's, which is the one I prefer, and Bill Clinton's incarnated in Al Gore's reinventing government. What you can't do is to play dead when Dodge is redefining government under your feet. And remember that if you are a Democrat different from a Republican, government must work and must be trusted. Number 6, the fact that after all the upheaval and terrible numbers, just 2% regret their vote for Trump is very telling. Another worrisome fact is that Trump's approval has been net positive on immigration, despite the is not longer net positive on immigration, but has been until recently net positive. Despite his cruelty and the memory of children in cages from his first administration. What is very telling about how adverse and even irritant the woke left is for the working class. Just consider the adverse reaction to Disney's remakes of stories treasured by many, and in times of uncertainty, you don't want to mess with nostalgia. But this is even worse because this suggests that people only can see two options, because either the abolish ICE irresponsible mischief or Trump's cruelty. There is nothing in the middle. And the Democrats have done a terrible job at presenting those alternatives, so conceding the middle ground to Trump. Only 39% believe Democrats have the right priorities, and just 38% of voters believe that Democrats' policies prioritize the middle class and the working class, while 35% believe they primarily benefit the wealthy. This is a reflection of what Thomas Piketty called the educated, the new bias of social democrats for the educated, whose priorities have pushed aside the priorities of the working class, and the working class itself from the base of these social democratic parties in Europe and here in the United States, to the benefit of the far right, which has capitalized this move more efficiently than the traditional right has, and in a way remind us of the incompetence of liberals and socialists to counter the rise of Orban in Hungary. So we see these two movements complementing each other and going to very very concerning evolutions, because the civil society is letting mediocre people at the left take the reins of these trends. Having said that, finally, having said that, how Bernie would have to evolve to become the kind of FDR populist he once was. He must tackle the most salient issue, which right now though for different reasons that in the times of Biden is still uncertainty. Uncertainty on the economy as a whole, on income expectations, which may result from the absence of income in a recession, or the small actors' inability to make ends meet when prices increase and precisely when interest rates are prohibitively high. And this is reflected by the trends of from the trends of inflation uncertainty that become very relevant during the Biden era. Uncertainty for small businesses who don't know if they will be able to sell their products and services, now unnecessarily made more expensive by Trump's tariffs and deportations. And this will be the result of dislocations on the supply chains that will in turn increase dislocations in the same supply chains, especially consider that in times of uncertainty, the worst outcome is an overreaction that could cause much more damage than necessary, much more damage if the economic actors, especially those without working, without pricing power, like small businesses and middle income or middle income consumers, could have suffered if they would have been able to prevent the to foresee the outcomes of the Trump's policies in this case. And this not to mention the financial crisis that may be incubated in the financial market and which many will not see until their 401ks start to suffer the consequences. Then B, having identified the salient issue, you must provide an answer. It's not, as I mentioned before, it's not enough a negative message. It's not enough to say that Trump is not cool. You must be able to say what you are going to do to correct that problem. So number one, start with an icon. If you ask me my preferences, those would be Roosevelt, FDR, and JFK, Kennedy. Number two, then create ideas is inspired by those icons, ideas on which you can build appealing narratives. Number three, flesh those ideas. Turn them into policy so your proposal looks serious and you are not like a wish list, and you see and you can use them to make politicians accountable, because if you see many politicians like Fetterman uh, running on your coattails and then making completely different decisions, is because you don't have nothing to make them accountable. And the only thing you can make them accountable if you have those clear guidelines about what that politician supposedly believes, and that is policy. Letter C is draw a clear line with the woke left. Don't assume childishly that voters will forget your silence with the extravagant proposals endorsed by the squad. That only will make you less credible and dent in your moral posture. This doesn't mean abandoning immigrants and transsexual people. As I mentioned before, this means reframing, redefining those issues in terms of those vulnerable groups' actual needs. And because the way the squad has been so invested in identity politics, you must draw a clear line, you must adopt a clear posture instead of just being silent and expecting that nobody's going to notice what that past postures of the squad. And finally, number 4, can AOC Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez be a legitimate successor to Bernie? In my opinion, yes, but yes, if she follows these recommendations. I even have all tweets when I contemplated her as a good prospect for a future president. And that was before the squad. And I remember that in one of her first appearances after being elected, she was booed in a rally when she tried to emulate Bernie's proclivity to buy parties at cheap, to make deals, to approach Republicans in order to get something done, because she deviated from the canon established by cool activists. And from them, she became a more compliant member of the squad. So she must reframe her policy, her image, and her policies, because otherwise, voters are going to only are not going to conclude that she has changed her mind. She will conclude that she is another hypocrite. So this time she's better known, and Bernie needs a successor. She has more leverage, and this is a great responsibility. Can she make that transition? I hope so, but then it's up to her. And having said that, I leave you with our newscast.
Good evening. This is Brian Thomas Simons, and these are the main headlines of this hour. Among other news,
A. New 166 executive decisions were released in the Oval Office during the weekend. Among them, 1. State Secretary Rubio won't be referred to as Secretary Little Marco or Lil Marco in official White House communications. At the Oval Office presentation, President Trump admitted this was the 4th time an executive decision was issued about this topic at the insistence of the state secretary, but that he couldn't help himself. 2. From now on, Canada and Greenland will be admitted not as states but as territories of the United States. The diminished status was explained by the last Canadian elections and polls in Greenland that implied hostility to the annexation. Asked about the reactions of Canada and Denmark to his decision, President Trump said that it was all Biden's fault. 3. Secretary Little Marco will stay in the Maldives until further notice, but will remain in competition in The Apprentice, White House edition, and be informed of the changes made by DOJ to his department if Elon Musk considers it necessary. Asked whether this decision changed any previous decision, President Trump smiled and declared that it didn't, but that it gave him the chance of calling him Little Marco. Secretary Rubio thanked him for the gesture from the Maldives. B. Senator Schumer to start anger management therapy after his bold threat of sending a strong letter to President Trump. Democratic Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer will have to start anger management therapy as his threat to send a strong letter to President Trump was considered too aggressive by DNC Chair Ken Martin. Our approval has been falling because voters fear we might be too uncivil at some time in the future. If we don't send them a clear signal that we will keep caving to Republicans in the name of bipartisanship, they might never vote for us again, added Chair Martin. C. MSNBC is next media network to cave to President Trump. To atone for Trump's perceived grievances, MSNBC will have to purchase an undisclosed amount of $Trump meme coins, and host Chris Hayes will present the special 32 Days to the Rapture. The special will include segments featuring 1. Senator Schumer's strong letter, 2. Revised predictions of precisely when and in what swing states Jesus will come to get out the vote for the Republican Party. 3. Trailer of Reverend John Hagee's new Left Behind movie. 4. Testimonies of televangelists where they confirm that President Trump, not Jesus Christ, will sit at God's right. Confirm that Stormy Daniels is playing the role of Mary Magdalene in Luke's chapter 25's prophecy that declares that Trump is the new Messiah that will make America great, and that Jesus Christ will come later as his aide. D. Former President Biden's dog commander could find asylum in Canada's embassy after weeks of being tracked by the FBI. As President Trump revoked the pardon granted by his predecessor, the FBI had been hunting him down across the nation to make him accountable for 5 bodies buried in the White House's gardens. President Biden's lawyer claims Commander's pardon was valid, and all evidence says that at least 2 of the bodies were victims of the president's sons Don Jr. and Eric, who have also been granted pardons. After years of indescribable horror due to Putin's threats, which forced them to appease him in the war in Ukraine and harm their own countries, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and former President Biden still have nightmares about the Russian dictator. In the case of the former American president, off-the-record sources declared that the condition was worsened by top national security advisor Jake Sullivan, who had fun frightening Mr. Biden with stories about escalation. Approached by reporters inquiring if this would affect his spot in the 2028 Harris-Biden ticket, Senator Schumer emphatically denied the rumors. It's precisely that which makes him an authentic Democrat. Asked whether Democrats would not benefit more with somebody stronger, like FDR, the senator declared, "No, FDR was a myth. He was not real, just a tale. He never existed. Never." President Biden once more caught trying to start his second term as he tried to sneak into the White House through the entrance for tourists. A security officer declared off the record that this was the 4th time this had happened. "We have talked to his relatives, but they say that Mr. Biden is dead set convinced of his victory and that he beat Medicare. We have warned them that we have a restraining order already and that we will have to go to a judge if they don't do something about this issue." Former President Biden convokes press conference in his residence to announce his first decision for his second term, which would consist of declaring a Memorial Day to honor his uncle eaten by cannibals and his own victory over Medicare. With Senator Schumer and DNC Chair Ken Martin in attendance, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries declared that change was coming and that this was an excellent way to start the 2028 campaign for the ticket Harris-Biden. Ocasio-Cortez and the Squad Decide platform for Ocasio-Cortez's run in 2028 presidential primaries. After days of negotiations, New York Representative Ocasio-Cortez and the other members of the squad agreed on the points that will spearhead her campaign in the upcoming presidential primaries. 1. The child tax credit will be increased to $5,000, but male beneficiaries will have to prove they have used the Amelia Perez toxic masculinity deconstruction method. If male beneficiaries can't afford the surgery, the federal government will pay for it in the hospital of their choice. 2. Offensive statues will be removed from public places according to a list Black Lives Matter will provide at the end of every fiscal year. 3. Every woke activist will be secured a position as DEI executive or consultant in her administration. Asked about whether Bernie Sanders agreed with the platform, the New York representative declared that he had been removed from the party because he kept talking about money in politics, the Voting Rights Act, unionization, minimum wage, and other boring stuff. He kept talking about oligarchy instead of the patriarchy, so we had to get rid of him, added Representative Rashida Tlaib, also a member of the squad. Tariffs Czar Peter Navarro and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, dismissing Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's fears, are preparing a new assessment of the economy, based on alternative facts, after dismissing the unfounded fears sown by Bessent in President Trump. According to this assessment, 1. The economy is great. The economy is beautiful. 2. Only MAGA members will be able to perform the jobs of the future. I must be clear on this. Being a MAGA supporter won't be enough. You must be core MAGA to be able to perform these jobs, added Navarro. 3. Tariffs are great and all countries love them, even China. 4. Immigrants are evil and all countries hate them, even China. 5. Ukraine, understanding that Mr. Zelensky is evil, will embrace President Trump's leadership and accept Putin's choice for their next president. This will start a new century of prosperity for everybody. 6. The working class will be happy to invest their retirements in Trump meme coins. And even workers from foreign countries will demand them, but American workers will have priority. 7. There will never again be recessions or inflation, and everybody will be happy when Trump starts his third term. This will start God's kingdom on earth. J. After Supreme Court validates the use of doctored photographs using Photoshop as evidence in the Abrego Garcia case, President Trump starts his 2028 campaign doing the same to the foreheads of his likely opponents with words that will remind voters why they didn't vote for them in 2024. Approached by reporters, Senator Schumer declared that he has disagreed with President Trump in another strong letter, especially the part that requires tattooing or branding such words in their actual foreheads, but that, as a Democrat, he will abide by Trump's executive decision because it was his duty to cave to Republicans. K. Man who stole a cop car while awaiting trial for stealing another cop car joins the Republican Party. Daniel Barton, 34, from Wisconsin, declared that I stole them cop cars because it was my sincere religious belief and because I'm a patriot. His lawyer declared that Barton, as in the case of Jack R. Blank, a man from Adams County, Illinois who, after invoking the sincere religious belief defense used by the January 6 riot defendants, was awarded $100,000 by Adams County, his client has also been awarded a similar amount and that, as in Blank's case, the arresting officers have been put on administrative leave and will have to go through religious sensitivity training.
This has been the news of this hour. Sponsored by Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit. Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? Did you vote for Trump in 2016 and then in 2020? This is the right church for you. If so, Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit is the only Christian church that can promise you in the Lord to have 72 virgins in heaven for only a donation of $50 a month. You will have access to those 72 virgins in heaven. For an additional $25, you will be allowed to replace 10 of them, and for $100, Heaven Premium, you will be allowed to choose them for yourself. Guaranteed, if you're not satisfied with those 72 virgins after you die, full refund of your money. We accept Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover.